All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Principal Suit. I'm Jamal Crook,
I'm Zach Shuttler.
and we're gonna jump straight into it today. Man, we're talking about diversity and leadership, or really valuing diversity in our space and in our circle. And I think sometimes diversity, depending upon what state you operate in, can be a controversial topic, especially when you start talking about race, gender, background, and diversity of thought. All those things impact our schools, and no matter how controversial or uncontroversial you think it may be, it is something that is happening at our schools as we help students figure out who they are and who they're going to become, and then also valuing who they are and who they're going to become. And just to start, I think that this is what makes America a great place to be for us. Because we have so many people from so many different walks of life. And I think had it not been for the diversity that has been cultivated, a lot of the things that we have and we hold near and dear to us would not be possible. And I think sometimes conflict creates synergy and it brings us closer together. But I also feel that it's so important to value differences. And even from a scientific perspective, in our human genome, um, as our genetics become more diverse, it makes us more suitable to survive and to thrive in the spaces that we're in. Zach.
Well, I mean, even if you look at, you and I come from vastly different backgrounds, but
Mhm.
me getting to know you has allowed me to understand, race better and
Mhm.
has allowed me to be a better version of me. I think when we talk about diversity, we want to make it a hot button issue, but that's when we focus on things that are very myopic. If we look at it from a coaching perspective, which I tend to, if I'm trying to put together a basketball team, I probably don't want 8 low post players. I want a couple low post players. I want some guys that are going to shoot some threes, maybe more so in today's day and age. And I want some guys who can distribute the ball. If I'm putting together a football team, I don't want 52 offensive linemen. If I'm putting together a baseball team, I don't want all starting pitchers. And when we talk about diversity, sometimes we want to center it on, race and having everything being fair and equal. But I think that's a small part of it. But I think it's more about creating the best possible team, the best possible product, the best possible society. We want people with different strengths, different backgrounds, different genders coming together to create our communities, our homes, society at large. We want people with different skill sets to build.
So one of the things that I want to mention is there are no two school systems that are the same, and diversity looks different in every school system. So I come from a district that has a diversity in ethnicity, right? We have Hispanic, we have Black, we have White, we have all different ethnicities. Whereas you have you have a large majority of one ethnic group that's
Yeah,
there.
I'm in rural Ohio, but that doesn't
Rural.
we don't have diversity. We have socioeconomic diversity, and somebody who is from a two-parent household that's bringing in $200,000 is much different than somebody who lives with their grandmother and they're on state assistance. That is two different lifestyles, and
Right.
when you bring all of a society together, whether it's a rural, suburban, or urban society, people tend to believe, or they want to believe, that when they walk into a school building, all the problems outside disappear. And that is such a faulty way of thinking. If there is drug addiction in your community, the remnants of drug addiction are going to be part of your school, not necessarily the drugs themselves, but the broken homes, the destabilized situations, the lack of knowing what's going to happen next. If you have economic diversity in your community that impacts how people interact and creates social barriers. You are going to have economic diversity in your school where those natural social barriers present themselves. And then it's incumbent on the school to try to break down those social barriers to show that Johnny, whose family might make a combined $20,000 a year, isn't that much different than Billy, whose family makes $250,000 a year. So as schools trying to break down those walls so that we can see that we're all humans, we all have similar challenges, is part of what we're tasked to do. And there really shouldn't be anything that controversial about that.
So, I was doing some reading and reflecting, and I came across this concept, this idea, and I forgot what I read it in, but it talked about with students or kids or people in general, the more you have people learn about one another, the more you have them read about how other cultures live, how other people live, it builds this empathy. And when you build that empathy within them, it changes the way that even kids and adults interact with one another. The more you learn about someone else. And I think that's so important as a foundational starting point. In schools, I feel like there has to be a way for us to, as leaders, cultivate and educate our students or the people that we lead on how other people live and their benefits and all of the different things that are associated with them, but to cultivate the necessary empathy that is required to coexist in the same space.
Well, we tend, as human beings, this is human nature. Human nature is we tend to fear or distance ourselves from things that we don't know. There's a great story in one of Adam Grant's books, The Social Psychologist, about somebody, it was a Black man that wanted to break down racism. So how he went about breaking down racism wasn't about giving these big, long speeches or demonizing people as evil. What he did is he went around individually to people and allowed them to get to know him. And that might be the only Black person they ever met. And what ended up happening was, and we'll just call the person, Bill. People liked Bill, and it changed their perspective of how they felt about that specific race, because now they knew somebody from that race that they liked and understood as a human being. So that doesn't mean that we don't use large platforms to make things better, but it's like anything else. When you get to know somebody and you see that they're a good person, that you see that they have a lot in common with you, you start to that fear kind of starts to go away, and then that's just part of being human. If you're insulated and you're not around other people, you kind of fear what you don't know. But getting to know people, that alleviates a lot of that. And I think that's why it's so important that we expose our kids to a wider range of things. And I think it's also important that we show kids what they're able to be. It's very real that a lot of females don't go into the sciences. But if we bring somebody into the school who's a female and a scientist, now we show all the girls in our school that it's possible. And yeah, we can talk about it on the macro level. Hey, you can do anything that you want to do. Yeah, that sounds great. But I don't know anybody who's doing what I want to do. But now the school brought in a doctor who's a young female. And now we showed all of our girls that, yeah, this isn't just some ethereal thing. Like, here's somebody named Dr. Smith who went and they did it. And I think that's why it's so important to show people examples of what they can be.
Right. So I think to that same point, this is why representation as a starting point matters so much. And I think about, Black students when President Obama became the president, and how student achievement went up for a lot of different reasons within the Black community. But then I also think about just other things, right? You mentioned we distance ourselves from things that we don't fully understand. And when the mind can't understand something, I believe that the mind does what's easy first and then what's right. So I think about, the person to break the sound barrier, to run the first sub 4 minute mile. These things were deemed impossible until someone did it. And now, it happens all the time. Or the first person to do anything. I think the first thing that everyone looks for in any setting, or in any picture, when you look at a picture, you look for yourself in the picture first. Then you look for people that you know, or people who are similar to you. So if I wear glasses, I'm looking for people that wear glasses, et cetera, et cetera. I think
I'm left-handed. People laugh. I tend to, when I'm in a room, I notice other people who are left-handed.
you look at
I am left-handed. Does that explain a lot?
it does. It does. But it's so important for us to cultivate pictures that represent our entire community and our staff.
When and again, it's not just about race, it's about background. When I was at a school district, I was the assistant principal, and it was a very diverse school for our area. Diverse in race, also diverse in socioeconomic structure. A lot of times, though, within the school, most of the teachers and staff tend to be, at the very minimum, people who like education. So they had good experiences in school. They had good experiences with their teachers. They listened, they minded, and life worked out well for them. So that's what they tend to expect from students, which we should, but within reason. So we had this rule in place that if you showed up late without a doctor's note, you were ineligible to participate in any extracurricular activity. I don't necessarily know why that was in place. I guess it makes sense in theory. And yeah, that was the rule. If you were late and didn't have an excuse, you couldn't play your football game or your basketball game. So we had this boy, we'll call him Michael, had a tough home life, lived with grandma. And he comes to school, and the first thing that a staff member tells him, hey, you can't play in your football game today because you're late. You know the rules. Well, Michael had a few choice words to say to the staff member. And I get my trusty walkie-talkie. I get the call that says, hey, Mr. Shuttler, we need you up on the 3rd floor. We have a student who's out of control. So I go, and when you're 27 and you're an assistant principal, you feel like everything's an emergency. Yeah. So I'm sprinting up to the 3rd floor. By the time you get up there, you're winded. And I see Michael, and Michael's, slamming his locker shut. He's, super angry. And I walk up to him. I'm like, hey, Michael, what's up? I heard you were disrespectful to Mrs. So-and-so. And he's like, yeah, I was disrespectful. I said, well, what happened? Well, I get to school today, and first thing that she says to me is that I can't play in my football game. I said, well, you know the rules. Like, it's 9 o'clock. You were supposed to be here at 8:15. Yeah, I get it, Mr. Shuttler, but do you know how I got here today? I said, Michael, I don't know how you got here today. He goes, well, I woke up this morning and nobody was there. So I didn't have a way to get to school. I said, so how'd you get here? He goes, I called a taxi cab. I got here by taxi. I did everything that I could to be here today. I woke up, nobody was home. There was supposed to be somebody home. I couldn't get to school. I missed the bus because nobody woke me up. And I called a taxi and I got here. And the first thing that you guys say to me is that I can't play today. How would you feel? So if you come from a middle class, family, you don't understand. Kid took a taxi cab to get to school today. And the first thing that we tell him is that he can't play in his football game.
Didn't even say good morning. Just you can't play in football game.
How's that fair? How's that equitable? But if you come from a background where mom always woke you up, mom made you toast, and mom walked you to the bus stop, or mom drove you to school, like, you don't understand. And I didn't understand. So that background working in that school made me a better person because I understood what kids went through. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you accept that and have low expectations for them, but it does change the way that you interact to try to get them to a place where they can succeed.
So along the same lines, I was talking to a group of students at my school. So a little bit about me, I grew up in the neighborhood for a significant portion of my childhood, in the same neighborhood that my kids live in now. And the neighborhood is called Suitcase City in Tampa. If you can imagine, there's a lot of transients, is why I call it Suitcase City. You never really unpack. And I was telling one of the students, we were just talking at lunch. And she was like, man, you're young to be a principal, this, that, and other. And I was giving her like a whole bunch of motivational things. And at some point, the conversation switched, like, where did you grow up? I was like, I said, that's the thing that I feel makes me special for y'all. I said, I lived where you lived at. I said, the apartment complex, they may have a different color now. I said, but I lived in there. I said, I know what it's like to wake up and not have furniture in the house, not have some basic necessities, and come to school and have to put on this representation and handle business and do all those things. I know what it's like to live that kind of life. And I said, the one question that I asked myself in that moment is this the life that I want to continue to live? And the answer for me was no. And the girl was like, yeah, absolutely not. I said, so the way out then is to be great where you are. Come to school, do what you're supposed to do, because we all have to go through school. And if you cultivate yourself right now and you train yourself to be great where you are, you'll always be great where you are. And this is where you learn how to do that. And with that exchange, I think, the importance, like you said, having someone who came from where you came from and has succeeded at a level that you want to succeed at, it changes the way that you interact with where you are.
And you can be very authentic. I mean, for me, I grew up, middle class. My mom and dad ran a small grocery store along the Ohio River. So I was always very well supported. However, being able to work at that grocery store and seeing how my mom and dad interacted with people made a huge difference for me. The community that I grew up in was not overly wealthy. We had a lot of people on government assistance that came to the grocery store to buy their bread and milk and baby formula. And watching my parents, specifically my mom, interact with those people and seeing how well she treated them and seeing that she treated them like gold. And it didn't matter if you were somebody who was relatively wealthy buying like an expensive steak or somebody coming in to use your WIC government vouchers. She treated them the same, and seeing them give her hugs and tell them about their family and the struggles that they were going through, and how my mom would smile and engage and laugh and talk with all of them. Sometimes people came into the grocery store just to spend their WIC coupons to talk to my mom. Like they could have went to like Kroger or Walmart or any place else. And that made a real impact on me to see how my mom and dad treated people who didn't necessarily have much, and how a visit to the grocery store could be a really good part of somebody's day. And that had a major impact on me. And when they retired and the grocery store closed, I worked there that last day. I was in my 30s, and seeing all the people that came back to give my parents a hug, not because of the product they were selling, but because of how they made them feel, really painted a solid picture for me that it doesn't matter what your line of work is, you can make a difference.
Right. And shout out to Mama Shuttler, because, in my interaction with her, she pulled me aside, one time I was up there and she looked at me and she said, you better go get it. Everything that's in you, you better go grab it, and you better go get it. I said, I am. Like just the way that she made me feel in that moment. So shout out to Mama Shelton, man. She's definitely an inspiration. And I can see how people would want to do that and come back. But that's just it. I think, in a lot of ways, I want to be very clear. It's okay to be where you are. I tell people, like, my kids are not going to grow up how I grew up. they're gonna have a better life. And my hope is that my kids are gonna have a better life than I have, and their kids are gonna have a better life than they have. And continuing to cultivate and growing them. And I feel like that's the same thing that we are called to do in education, is to put kids in a position to where they can have a better life than their parents. And
It's
then
laying,
having,
it's laying that foundation. And,
right.
you know, you talk about your background, that you lived in those, you know, low income apartments, that you didn't always have everything that you needed to have to be successful. And now you're an educator. So now you've cleared a path for somebody else to follow what you've done. You know, my background's different. I can't be authentic with a kid and tell them like, hey, I grew up with nothing, because that's not true. I think when you build teams, it's
Mhm.
important to have diversity within your team, whether the diversity be race, you know, gender, socioeconomic status, because in education, you're working with a wide variety of kids. I'll be able to connect with kids that you might never be able to connect with, and adults, and vice versa. If you build a very, you know, uniform team where everybody grew up middle class, nobody had economic struggles, nobody knows what it's like to be, you know, the outcast in a room, or look different or feel different than somebody else, it's going to be very hard to connect with all those different kids. When I was teaching a college class, um, a student raised their hand and said to me, like, you know, hey, Dr. Shetler, you know, you talk about how important it is to connect with kids, but, you know, just being around you, you know, you have your doctoral degree, you know, you talk about how you grew up middle class. How can you relate to any of these kids going through tough things?
Mhm.
And my response was, you know, I connect with them. So I try to get to know them for who they are. But I also try to hire and put a wide variety of people in place that have the ability to connect, because I can't be Superman and be relatable to everybody. But I can build a team where there's somebody on that team, you know, for everybody.
And I think that's important. You don't necessarily have to have lived the life of the people that you're trying to lead, to lead them in a extremely meaningful way. And I go back to, and I share this example all the time. You know, Tiger Woods was the greatest golfer to ever live. He had a coach. He was number one. There was nobody better than him. Nobody could say that, hey, like, I'm number one right now. The best golfer in the world had someone who wasn't like him in a lot of different ways, say like, hey, let me help you improve in this area. And that's the same thing where we are with life. I don't necessarily have to know what it's like to struggle at your level to help you overcome
Mhm.
that struggle, because I've struggled in a different way. Because you may struggle with X and I may struggle with Y, but the mechanism as humans to overcome those same things is similar. Not always congruent, it's similar, because the way that we feel on the inside, we've all experienced grief. We've all
Anxiety.
experienced joy. We've all experienced sadness. And you know, we tell people all the time, never get too high, never get too low. It's never as good as you think, it's never as bad as you
Never
think.
bad.
It's always somewhere in between. So it doesn't matter how high or how low you are, being able to support people where they are is not exclusive to having lived the life that they've lived. And I think it goes back to making sure as leaders we surround ourselves with people who have those differing perspectives, because Lord knows, you know, and I said it on the last episode, I am lowercase a. I'm not type A, I'm lowercase a. But Lord knows you can't have a room full of type A people.
No,
Type A
that's a recipe for disaster.
people, there's the test tube team of leaders, right? Like it's come straight out of the science lab. That's a recipe for disaster. You need someone who's a great communicator. You need someone who's great at analyzing. You need diversity in everything that we do. If you need it within a team, we need it in every walk of life. And I think as leaders, if we understand that and cultivate that and lead by that mantra, it starts to break down all of the different barriers. And diversity is not just limited to the color of our skin. It's diversity of thought, diversity of experience. It's diversity in how things make us feel. because I may be afraid to do something that you're not afraid to do, and your courage will give me the confidence I need to be successful in that area.
Courage builds courage. Are you familiar, Jamal, any with the Pygmalion effect or the Rosenthal effect? I'm sure you are as an educator. That's the belief
Yeah.
that your expectations for others will lead to higher
Okay.
expectations.
Yep.
And there's some dispute on how effective it is, but it's kind of like one of those things to where we know exercise is good for us. We just might not see the results right away. We know that the Rosenthal or the Pygmalion effect makes people feel better about what they're doing by believing in them. So even if the science isn't as definitive as we want it to be, even though a lot of studies show that it is, then where's the downside in having a high level of belief?
Hey, listen, I tell you what, and I've used that to build people all the time. I'll go into a space and I'll see a characteristic of someone that is good within them, but probably needs to be developed more. And I'll go in and I'll say, man, you do a really great job of X. And the way that you do this, like I can really, and I just hype that up like they're like the best at it. You know what I've learned? I've never told someone good job in the thing and they do a bad job in that thing.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about diversity, but if we want people to reach their potential, so often we talk about what they can't do. Well, this person grew up on this side of the railroad tracks, or you know who this kid's dad is. His dad's in prison. What chance does he have? And we focus on all these negatives as opposed to reinforcing the good thing. Hey, you know what? This kid's stubborn, but what if we reshape that as tenacious? Okay, this kid's tenacious. What he believes in, he's going to fight for. So now when we have those conversations, we try to build that strength. One thing that we've started to use at the school, we used it with our student council, is the Gallup Strength Finder. The kids take the Strength Finder assessment, and now they know what their 5 top strengths are and share those with the adults. And now we can pour into those strengths instead of building on what their perceived deficiencies are. And a lot of research out there will back it up that it makes an impact, knowing what your strengths are and having people pour into those instead of always being focused on your deficiencies.
So switching gears here, we talk about our system, our school system as a whole, and how can leaders drive meaningful change within our system?
I think it can be a challenge in education, especially where you're geographically located, and that's why it's important to understand diversity is more than just somebody's skin color or religious background. It's about their socioeconomic, it's about their gender, it's about their beliefs, it's about their thoughts. It's about leaders being confident enough to hire people that think different than them, and being open to learning and understanding more. I think sometimes what we do is kind of a facade, like, hey, we're going to do this PD on diversity and acceptance. And we do it just to check a box. But it's about getting to know the individual and then creating platforms for that individual to excel. It's about bringing people into your school and providing clear and concrete examples that people with their background, of their race, went on to accomplish something great. It's about exposing students to different things. So often when we say, hey, Molly over there, she's from an education family, she's probably going to be a teacher. Or, hey, Joe over there, his family works in the gas and oil fields, he's probably going to be a field worker one day. The reason why those things exist is because the child relates to that, and that's all that they know. Who's to say that Molly would be a teacher if we expose her to things that are different than education? Who's to say that kids will go into the gas and oil field if they go into the gas and oil field, that they can be a chemist, they can be an engineer in that field, they can work in HR, they can be an attorney in the energy field. There's so many things out there, but if we don't expose students to it, if we don't show them that people from that geographic location who look like them and talk like them are out there doing it and being successful, then it just becomes kind of a roll of the dice that they ever find it. And that's what schools are for. It's about education. It's not about, we talk so much about putting people on career paths. I think we put people on exposure paths and
Yeah.
show them what's out there, and then they'll gravitate to a career. I think sometimes we're way too hardline on making it a career. It should be an exploration.
Right. And I think along those same lines, like a few things came out as you were talking. Number one, I think as leaders, we have to start to tweak the system. Because if the system is producing, if the system, every system will produce exactly what it's designed to produce. Unless you change parts of the system to accommodate where we are now, that's beneficial to students, then we'll we're going to keep getting the same results. You know, if you plateau on a workout routine, unless you change or tweak something, you're going to keep getting very similar results. So I think it's as leaders looking at the system and saying, what can we do to improve the system to improve outcomes for all? And to your point, exposure. Someone told me this a long time ago. Said, if you hang around with 9 people who are fools, you will be the 10th. If you hang around 9 people who are successful, you will be the 10th. What am I saying? I think there's a principle, and a biblical principle. Everything produces after its own kind, right? To put that into the broad spectrum of diversity and exposure, if I don't know that something exists, I never have the opportunity to engage with it, because I promise you, while we're sitting here talking about education, I did not know that I loved science the way that I did until I was a senior in college. And I would sit in and I would audit science classes. I got a PE degree, and I audited the science class so much that instead of teaching PE, I taught biology. So I got the certification for biology in the state of Florida. What am I saying? Had I known earlier about biology and been exposed to different levels of it as someone who was in school, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now, because I really like health science. I would have went to go and be a doctor, but I wasn't exposed to that. I was
Mhm.
exposed to school, really school. I fell in love with the concept of transformation, but I wasn't able to reproduce at a level in which someone would if they were pursuing to become a doctor, simply because I wasn't exposed to my love for biology until I became a senior in, I said high school, but a senior in college, really. So I think it's so important, like you said, to expose people to all the different levels, because I may identify with something that I wouldn't have, but because I had that exposure, now I can go in and be around those people, and then I can reproduce at their same level.
There's a really cool story. Coach Tomlin, Mike Tomlin, coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, my favorite team. They were playing the Raiders on Christmas Eve. I think this might have been 3 years or so ago. And they had him mic'd up, and he was talking to some of his players. You know, Christmas Eve, I think the game time temperature that day was in the teens. Players on the field trying to get warmed up. I'm sure there's a lot of other things they were thinking they could be doing, because no matter what you do, we look at football as a glamorous lifestyle, but after
Mhm.
you've done it for a while, even though it's a really cool job, it's a job. And when it's 17 degrees, there might be some other things on Christmas Eve you'd rather be doing. And so he pulls a couple of the players aside and he says something to the effect of, we're blessed to be out here tonight, playing on Christmas Eve, national television. I could be in Newport News, Virginia right now, wearing steel-toed boots and working on a shipyard. And he didn't mean that as a knock on anybody working in the shipyard. He was giving it perspective. And to me, it meant somebody exposed him to a different life. That a lot of people from Newport News, the expectation was, you graduate from high school, you go work in the shipyard, and that's what you should be doing. Somebody exposed him to a different life, that he could be a leader, that he could be a football coach, that he could be a football player, and he's never going to take that for granted. And he's going to give that perspective to other people.
Right. So let's switch gears here and talk about overcoming barriers to diversity in leadership.
I think there's just natural barriers. I think it's easy to be critical sometimes of leaders. And I think this is why when you talk about, I don't know, if you take a look at some things like Major League Baseball or NFL are doing and trying to, create diversity in their front office and creating a pipeline for players to become coaches, to become GMs,
Mhm.
those things become hot button issues and people are critical of them. But if you look at it from a leadership perspective, you can only hire the candidates that are available. So if certain genders or certain races aren't exposed or given the opportunity to things, by the time it filters up to the pipeline for me to hire principals, I can only hire who's licensed. And if the whole not the whole field, but if the principal field is, and I'm just making these numbers up, like 90% white or 85% male.
Well, we're having some technical difficulties. So what we'll do is we'll keep it going here. I think some strategies for aspiring leaders. So important as you were saying, the field is the field. And as we grow and we cultivate uh, our leadership from any standpoint, it's so important to provide opportunities. If you are someone who's in the field and you're underrepresented, there are a lot of things that you have to do. You have to pursue it. You have to connect with people. You have to step outside your comfort zone and some of those different things. But it's so very important that the leaders who are in place to provide opportunities to those who are aspiring. I myself, I'm a product of opportunity. I don't know that I'd be where I'm at right now if somebody didn't see my potential and give me an opportunity, be back, and give me an opportunity to lead. Had I not, let me back up, to give me an opportunity to lead when I didn't necessarily deserve it. So it's very important as leaders we provide those opportunities to aspiring leaders, so that way they can have that option. Zach, you dropped off and now you're back.
Yeah, I dropped off, now I'm back. I was talking about like the pipelines we create. We can only hire who's available, especially in fields where licenses, are required. So I think if you look at the education system, and our district has this in place, I think other districts have it in place where when you're doing the clubs, you have an education club to where you expose students to what it's like to be a teacher. And I think we need to do a better job once teachers are hired, A, creating diversity in the teaching field, and then B, creating more opportunities for teachers to be exposed to what it's like to be an administrator. So when these jobs come open, that we have a more diverse candidate pool.
And I was saying too while you're gone, it's so important for us as leaders who are in position to give our people those opportunities to lead. And sometimes, people necessarily may not be as prepared as we would like them to be. But I think for me, being young in this, I feel like I was given some opportunities that maybe should have went to some more experienced people, but somebody saw fit to give me the opportunity. And I think as a leader who may be underrepresented, it's so important to maximize those opportunities and to be prepared, from the small things to the big things. It's how you put yourself in a position to continue to grow in that field or that area.
Yeah, I mean, same thing for me. I was able to earn my first admin job when I was 27, and I put earn in quotes. I had all the qualifications, I did the work, but there's some things in life that you don't have full control over. You can give a great interview, you can have all the credentials. Somebody still has to sign off on you doing the job. And I was blessed. Somebody believed in me at a very young age, and it led to a great career. And I think when we're given those blessings, kind of looking at the dynamics of the field and seeing who we can, help the next step of the way. And I use the term help also in quotes because people earn it. That's
Mhm.
that's the misnomer. People earn it. They just need one of the decision makers to give them a chance to show it. And when we've been, given these, decision-making roles, it's incumbent on us to help the next generation move forward.
Right. And like I always say, you'll never see a turtle sitting on the fence and it got there by itself.
See a turtle on a fence post, he had some help getting there.
Right. We always need some help. So as we wrap things up, as leaders this week, we got to consider who's missing from our leadership table and what can you do to bring their voices into the conversation. And then Zach, I think this is important. Maybe you can answer this for us as we reflect. What steps can a person take to mentor someone who doesn't look like them?
That's a great question, Jamal. What's that? So if I look back at my career, um, especially when I was an assistant principal and I was at a more diverse district, a much more diverse district, it's about creating an environment where they can be themselves and that their skills can be put on display. I was listening to the quarterback Josh Allen talk, quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, and he said the Bills have a mantra that I thought was really neat. It says they say "Be you with us," and I'll say that again because I thought it was kind of unique, simple but unique. Be you with us. So they're trying to create a team culture where everybody brings their own backgrounds, their own strengths, their own beliefs, and then we go out and we do it together. We have a goal together. So creating that type of environment where you feel like you don't have to pretend to be somebody else, that you can be you, but you're doing it collectively to reach a goal, I think sets a great message when you're mentoring somebody. Because being a mentor isn't about creating a carbon copy of you. It's about helping people navigate challenges that you've already experienced to give them a framework. So as an educator, I think you create your superintendent councils, your student councils, and you actively do some recruiting to try to diversify your pool. I think one thing that can be a struggle is that we say, hey, we're going to build this student council, and we send out a Google form and we have students apply. Well, invariably, all the students that apply have 4.0 GPAs. They're all in the college prep classes. And it's not that they're not all awesome. You're just pulling from a very select candidate pool. So I think as an administrator, as an educator, it's, how do we go out and actively recruit? How do we find some diamonds in the rough, students that normally wouldn't apply to be on these leadership teams that we know have leadership capacity, they just don't believe that they do. And I think that's a good foundation to begin that mentor process. Go out and actively seek out people that might not apply for leadership roles.
I think the reverse, how to obtain mentorship. I think mentorship really bridges the gap between where you are and where you want to go a lot faster. And for me, I think even our relationship, reach out to people on LinkedIn. You start to and look for people who don't look like you or who have different walks of life. So that way you can connect on a level. And then, some mentorships are for years and you cultivate great relationships. And some of them, are for one conversation. Some of them are for 2 weeks. But in every scenario, I think on someone like myself is reaching out and making your intentions known. And then you'll every now and again meet somebody like Zach Shuttler.
And mentorship, I think and Ryan Holiday, the author, said this: mentorship isn't something that can always be, and rarely is, planned or crafted. You often don't realize somebody's your mentor until after you've established that relationship. You don't tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, Jamal, will you be my mentor? No, you connect with that person some way, somehow. And then after the days, the weeks, the months go by, you kind of realize, like, hey, Jamal's somebody that I call when I don't know how to solve a problem, or when I'm having a personal struggle. I reach out to Jamal to see how he would handle it. Oh, Jamal's my mentor. Sometimes it's easier to see things in hindsight than it is as they happen.
Yes, indeed. That's all I got for you guys today. Appreciate you joining us. Until next time.
All right, thanks, Jamal.